And that was the problem that we started with. Of course, today VXT solves many more problems and is more broadly useful to our customers. But
Yes.
that was the problem that we started for, and that's what we focused on when we were building our like MVP as a part of this like pivot of the company.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and today we're thrilled to have Luke Campbell, the co-founder and chief executive of VXT, joining us. Luke, at 23, co-founded VXT along with Lucy Turner while they were still students at the University of Canterbury. VXT helps lawyers make phone calls, send messages, and host meetings, but has also become a beacon of success in the New Zealand tech scene, with Luke recently being named the Young Achiever of the Year at the NZ High Tech Awards for 2025. In this episode, we're going to delve into the origins of VXT, into Luke's story. We'll learn about the technology and a range of aspects of the business. I think we've got some pretty interesting things to chat through. And before we dive in, a big thank you to our show partners for making this episode possible. Big thanks to 1NZ, HP, Spark, 2 Degrees, Gorilla Technology, and Workday. All right, let's jump in. How are you, Luke?
I'm good, thanks, Paul.
Well, thanks for making the effort to come and join us in the Podcast New Zealand studio. I know you're Christchurch based, so hopefully you're coping with our weather all right. Some days it's good, some days it's not at this time of year.
Yeah, hey, it's better than Christchurch today. It was pouring down when I left.
Okay,
So I'm glad to be here.
Well, that's a win. Look, as you know, I kind of like to start at the beginning with these sort of stories. So, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your upbringing and what life was like for you as a youngster, where you grew up and so on.
Yeah, I grew up in Canterbury in the South Island. First few years of my life, I moved around a lot. Don't really remember anything, as most people. But I went to primary school in Ashburton, and then when I was 7, moved to Christchurch, and probably pretty ordinary upbringing. Maybe one of the things that stood out at the time was when I was 7, I started playing World of Warcraft, and I had my own PC, which was pretty rare for none of the friends that I had at that time had their own computers or spend as much time on their computers that I did. So pretty much every moment I was outside of school, I was sat on a computer chair, playing computer games, exploring YouTube, broader internet and stuff like this. But World of Warcraft was a big one for me in the early days.
Yeah, okay.
So I was hanging out with a lot of adults on WoW.
Yeah.
Raiding dungeons. I was pretty bad at the game though, as you'd imagine.
And what do you think sort of came out of that time in terms of sort of shaping your view on the world in various ways? You mentioned you're sort of interacting with people that were, older than you were. What were the things that you can recall from that?
Probably these days, it's really common to talk about how people are addicted to their phones and things like this. It was very rare to have those kinds of conversations 20 years ago. And, when anything like that was brought up, it was pretty immediately dismissed by anyone. But I was very addicted to basically spending time on the computer. But certainly World of Warcraft, the quests were all written in Old English and just they're kind of written for an adult audience. So I got really good. My reading age was well above the other kids, which was, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. And, you do a lot of problem solving and maybe a little bit of teamwork in those games, although most of the time I was just screwing with people. And so you're causing trouble.
A bit of fun.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting though, around, the teamwork and, those other elements that can kind of come out of gaming. And often, these things that at the time might not seem at all important in some way can end up, playing in and helping us as we get a bit older, right? And sometimes we kind of look at computer games and we look down on them. And, the addiction pieces kind of come into that. But, I know for myself as a youngster, it was probably the gaming aspect of technology, although it was pretty basic gaming, I've got to say, in the 80s. But that sort of caught my attention as a youngster and made me pay attention to computers. And then, things opened up from there. Was that some way the case for you, that it kind of opened up a longer term interest?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There are a few things that stood out. I tried hacking my high school school like computer network when I was like 14.
And
I
which
got
school were you at, by the way?
Kashmir High.
Okay.
And I got banned from the computers for 6 months because I was like moderately successful. And my friend actually installed Minecraft on the school server as well, so which they never removed because they viewed it as being educational.
Okay.
So it's still there today, which is kind of interesting.
Nice move. Yeah.
But I think obviously different types of computer games will teach you different things. Like, you know, if you're playing Call of Duty or like Fortnite or something, maybe you'll learn like hand-eye coordination. Generally, you know, that's like a fast-paced game. I played a lot of strategy games when I was growing up, which have been like super important, taught me a lot of things. I think was at a talk from like Jamie Beaton like 5 years ago, and one of the big parts of his talk, it was to like a young audience, and you know, one of the central pieces of advice that he shared was like, if you're interested in startups and becoming a founder, I had already started VXT at this time, but it was just kind of a reinforcing piece of advice. He said, you play strategic games. And, you know, if you look at some of the most successful founders in the world, like, you know, Mark Zuckerberg stands out, of course. His like favorite game to play, and the only game that he still plays, as far as I'm aware, is Civilization, which is like a big strategy game. Yeah. So yeah, those kinds of things definitely stood out. I think after not too long, I got a second screen for my computer, and you know, I was very much like, you know, mentioned that perhaps I was like addicted, and so I was like very much like an iPad kid, right? So I'd have whatever game I was playing on one screen, and then often it was like documentaries playing on YouTube on the other screen, like same time, right? Or maybe movies or something.
Bit of multitasking going on there.
Yeah, perhaps not super useful, but certainly I learned some things, I guess.
And was there a time, you know, during your childhood where you did anything entrepreneurial, or were there, you know, any signs of this sort of business and entrepreneurial and startup sort of interests during those years?
Well, no, but I'd say like probably some of the characteristics that are shared by great founders that like maybe I have were definitely very clear. Like many great founders are highly disagreeable people, so they can be really hard to work with, and they're the type of people who you know, you say something, maybe it doesn't, you know, you don't say it with much intent, and then the person says, no, you're wrong. Here's what's right. Yeah. And that was certainly like the type of like kid I was. So probably, you know, if someone had that view that was a characteristic that was common in successful founders, I definitely do today, then like maybe they would have like saw that and gone, oh, okay. But I mean, lots of people are pretty disagreeable, so I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. So, you know, tell us about what did you study, and why did you pick going to you went to University of Canterbury?
Yeah. So like to your last question, yeah, I wasn't really in an environment where, you know, you extracurriculars like were a thing. Certainly not like, you know, young entrepreneur scheme, which is a great program, but I wasn't the type of person to be involved in that. But I got really passionate about space at high school, and through space physics. Yep. And I was a very bad student, right? Because I spent all my time playing computer games. So, you know, I would go to sleep at like 4 a.m. most evenings, and then like fall asleep in my class at school. So I didn't actually get university entrance at high school. So I had to do an entrance course at UC. UC has like a really good program for people who don't have UE. So I did that and went on to do a Bachelor of Science majoring in physics and economics.
So along the way, you met your co-founder, Lucy. So yeah, how did it all take shape for you to land on your initial sort of founding ideas? Now, I guess quite common for there to be pivots and changes. But what was that initial, you know, period, and what did that look like?
Yeah, well, I mentioned that I was pretty passionate about space, and so really pretty early I discovered SpaceX and Tesla, and Tesla through SpaceX, I guess, and then Elon Musk, and kind of learned about the founding story behind those companies, which was super interesting to me. And over time, I kind of was like, okay, you know, I have all of these things that I want to do. Probably startups are like a good avenue to accumulate the like power to do those things, to kind of like live the life I want, I guess. And so it was always in the back of my mind that I wanted to start a company. But of course, like, where do you start? So, once I was getting further along in my degree, I became like, okay, well, probably if I'm going to do something, like, I probably need to start working on it. So went to the Centre for Entrepreneurship at UC and started, like, I was trying to get support, like, what is the first step that you take? And, did a course on innovation in business. And James Carr, who was at the UCE at that time, was like super supportive and like pointing me in the right direction. And I also like found out about Y Combinator at that time as well, and all of the resources that they have online were incredibly valuable. And one of the things that you learn pretty early on is instead of going, wow, AI is really interesting, I'm really excited about it, what can I apply AI to have a cool business? Instead, you should identify a problem to solve. And so obviously, cool, okay, you should identify a problem to solve. That's easier said than done, because like, okay, I've heard the word problem and, it's a bad thing, right? Like, okay, I understand that, but like, what does it mean to find a problem in the context of a business? And so I was kind of just like stumbling around for a while, and then I got a voicemail message from, like, I got 2 in quick succession, and I was like trying to check my messages. I was on 2 degrees, so I had to pay to check my messages. I had to top up my phone. It took me like half an hour to check these 2 messages, and like pretty much they said, call me back. And
all that pain for
that. And so I was really frustrated, and then it kind of clicked for me. I was like, I'm pissed off. That seems like a problem, right? And so I was like, what is an alternative to what I just did? And there weren't any good alternatives in New Zealand. And so the initial idea was to build a consumer application that people could to help people manage their voicemail messages. And the core, I guess, idea was we would transcribe your voicemail messages and display them in an application, kind of like email. And didn't exist in New Zealand. I didn't have a computer science background. Lucy did. And so I spent arduous conversations, lengthy conversations, convincing her to start the company with me. But at that time, Lucy was like, business is a bad word, but eventually, I'm very disagreeable and persistent. So eventually she was convinced, and, we went on to build that first version of our idea.
Fantastic. And how important was it for you to have a co-founder? How important in getting started was you and Lucy Turner working together? Would you have done something if she hadn't have taken that interest, or this was definitely something that needed the both of you from your perspective?
I mean, I would have done something, but it would have been an utter failure probably. So yeah, I mean, Lucy was essential to and is essential to our success today. So it was incredibly important to me to have a co-founder, especially one who had like an opposite skill set and characteristics to me, and Lucy was that individual.
Yeah.
I'm like highly disagreeable and persistent. Lucy's highly agreeable and conscientious, and also much smarter than I am. And so we work together because of those things. like we make a really good team. So yeah, super important.
And what would your advice be for others that maybe they get into a situation, they feel that there's a huge benefit of having a co-founder, but it's not always an easy thing to find the right person, and then it sounds like you had to be persistent to really sell the idea to Lucy.
I think that once you have an idea and some like confidence around it, you're like, I really want to go and do this thing. Well, you should go and hang out with the type of people who you think could be your co-founder. Ideally, many of them. What's really difficult if you want to start a software company and you don't have, great friends who trust you and believe in you. Great software engineers tend to be highly conscientious and risk-averse people. So great software engineers almost never want to start companies. So that's like it's a really challenging like dichotomy to get around. But in general, just like go and spend the time with the people you think might make good co-founders for your company. And those are often, depending on the business, it'll be like different types of people. And just like tell them your idea, talk to them about things. And ideally you'll find someone who's willing to give it a try, give them lots of equity. If there's only 2 of you, split it in the middle. And if you are not persistent enough and you cannot find a co-founder, then like maybe that speaks to this isn't like the right thing for you.
Now, you mentioned splitting the equity. Yeah, I've come across a lot, I guess you come across different approaches that different founders take. And yeah, I'm curious to kind of hear your take on that approach, because I'm sure you will have come across a range of approaches, and sometimes you've got the person with the original ideas who wants to take most of the equity and leave little bits for others. But I think I guess each situation's different. So how did you put that together in your head?
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing that I'd say is probably very common mistake of thought that ideas are valuable at all, because they're not. Ideas are like almost zero value. And so, for Lucy and I, neither of us had any experience or money to put forward. And so, regardless of the fact that, I came up with the idea, it seemed like just cut it down the middle. And I think, perhaps, I was more motivated, and, perhaps I might have been more willing to, sacrifice more for the company. Arguably, let's say, Lucy doesn't want to start a company. And so maybe you could use that. But like, honestly, like it's hard to make a really good argument for splitting equity unequally unless you very clearly have much more resources than your co-founders. So yeah, I mean, this is a common question from people who are just like starting out and interested in recruiting a team, interested in recruiting co-founders. They're like, how much equity should I give them? And it's like, and they're like, I have the idea and I've started working on it already. It's like, nah, bro, that doesn't mean anything. If you're here to start a really great, high growth startup company, and a high growth startup company is very different to 99% of other businesses. And, if it goes well, you will work on it for 10 years plus, probably much longer. And almost all of the value will be, across that length of time. So if you've worked on it for like a couple months and you've got an idea, so just split your equity pretty evenly. That's my view.
That's good. And look, some people come to me with ideas, and they're asking for advice. How do I make this thing, happen, Paul? And it always seems to be a challenge to suggest that they shouldn't maybe get so excited about their idea and how valuable the idea is, because, as you say, ultimately, you've got to be able to execute on it and so on. How do you talk to that when people, ask you these sorts of questions? Yeah,
I mean, you make a great point. People are often really excited about the solution. And, I think that, as we touched on a little bit earlier, that's kind of backwards. Ideally, you should be excited and focused on like the problem you're solving and like maybe the customers you're solving it for. And so how do you get to a point where like you have a really good understanding of the customers and the problem? We went through that process after we realized that our first idea, that voicemail app, was like a really bad business from a financial perspective. We had to pivot the company, and so went through this process of looking for other problems to solve. And when we had like an inkling of what one might be, we spent a lot of time interviewing the customers who we thought faced that problem, and it gave us a much deeper level of knowledge on those problems themselves, but also the customers. And so yeah, I mean, a lot of founders, a common like failure mode is, I have a solution, I've tried to sell it to some customers, I'm not getting traction, so they must be the wrong customers. But probably the right reaction to that is, your solution sucks. Hopefully you know enough about the customers and the problem to have confidence about that. And if you do, then try some other solution. Yeah.
Great. Well, maybe we can delve into exactly what it is that the VXT does today. What's the problem that you solve? It's lawyers that you're solving problems for, right? So, tell us what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So today, lawyers spend half of their time at work on paperwork that comes from phone calls, messages, and meetings. Basically, the paperwork that lawyers spend their time on comes from communicating with clients. And so law firms use VXT to make phone calls, send messages, host meetings, and we automate all of that paperwork using integrations with legal software and AI. So a really common use case for VXT today, and what is our core business, what was the first product that we launched with after we pivoted, is a phone system that lawyers use to make calls. So when a law firm comes to VXT, we port all of their phone numbers to our network. We're their phone service provider. And then when their clients call them or they call their clients, those phone calls go through our application. Users might choose to record their calls if they want, but only about half of the calls that go through our network are recorded. If it's recorded, we'll transcribe and summarize that call, and we can save a lot of time with that, functionality. But perhaps more importantly for our customers, there is a lot of really simple paperwork that comes off the back of every time a lawyer communicates with a customer. So, every time a lawyer makes a phone call in VXT, we save them about 5 minutes per call. We might just record the fact that a phone call took place at all without any additional information. We might record their billable time from the call if they charge by the hour. And notably, the average lawyer who uses VXT makes about 22 phone calls per day. So those 5 minutes add up really quickly. And they spend around 90 minutes per day using VXT. So it's a really important part of the software they use every day.
Yeah, well, that's good. And how did you walk us through how you got through that pivot and the chats that you had with customers and with organisations to get to that place where you understood the challenges and the problems that they were having.
Yeah, so rewind to 2020, we had this voicemail app. We had 10,000 users of the product, 1,000 paying customers. These are individual people who are paying for our app. A lot of them were paying for it to use it professionally. So there were lots of individual lawyers, real estate agents, recruiters, electricians, and so on. And so, we quickly started to struggle to grow revenue. And one of the things we tried to solve that problem was to go to those businesses where we had at least one paying individual user, go to the people who ran the business and say, hey, John from accounts uses VXT to help manage their voicemail. How about you buy it for everyone else? And this is coming from, I'm spending a lot of time online, learning about great startup companies. And, at this time, Slack was the fastest growing company in history. And, you learn quickly when you hear about that story, land and expand, right? So you get one user and then you get everyone else. So we went to these companies and failed dramatically every single time. So we'd go in and pitch and then they'll go like, no way, basically. And so we, tried that over and over again, spoke to customers in all of the different industries where we had paying users. One of those conversations was with a law firm in Christchurch, and they said, no, we're definitely not going to buy your thing. But at this point, they sensed my desperation and started talking about kind of other related problems that maybe we could help them with. And at that time, they were focused on all of these problems with their phone system. And so, I was really interested in that. And he said, if you solve all of these problems for me, I'll pay you anything you want. And, absolute desperation at that time. I was like, that sounds great. And I was very optimistic. So I thought maybe solving those problems would be pretty easy. But I knew that we were in this situation in the first place because we hadn't spent enough time talking to customers in the early days. Otherwise, we would have identified that helping people manage their voicemail was not a problem worth solving. And so instead of just diving in head first, we set out to interview lots of different people. And so, we focused mainly on interviewing lawyers, but, we had a bunch of other industries in the mix there early on. And over time, we just focused those interviews on a smaller set of people. And, we asked them all about their lives, focusing on their work. What do you do every day? How do you spend your time? What proportion of your time is in these different buckets? What's something you do regularly that really frustrates you? And what was really interesting and kind of special was that every lawyer we asked that last question to said recording time. And every lawyer that made more than 5 calls per day said recording time from phone calls. And I mean every single one without fail answered that question in that way, which was remarkable.
Right, so they're really struggling to get the details or whatever they needed onto timesheets off those calls. Is that effectively it?
Yeah, absolutely. And 20% of billable time goes unrecorded in the legal sector because lawyers record their time in 6-minute increments, and so of course you're not going to be able to do that reliably every day. And so we figured that for those types of lawyers who made a lot of calls, we could build a phone system that would automatically record their time. And that was the problem that we started with. Of course, today VXT solves many more problems and is like much more generalizable, like it's more broadly useful to our customers. But
Yes.
that was the problem that we started for, and that's what we focused on when we were building our like MVP as a part of this like pivot of the company.
And so at that time, how were you getting on in terms of funds and funding and so on, right? That's always an important part of the startup journey, is being able to survive and pay your way when you've got to eat yourself, and across your team. So what sort of size were you at that stage?
So I was one of a small number of full-time employees at VXT at that time. So I had owned, when we launched that product, so this is like, the pivot is kind of underway. When we launched that product, I'd only been working full-time for, like 16 months. So I was very green. I had already gone through like our first like serious fundraising experience, which was a very bad experience. I mentioned this recently. I was phenomenal at networking. In the first year of VXT, while I was still a full-time student, I met 3 people every day on average. So I connected with 1,000 people. And
that's pretty impressive, Luke.
I think so too. But problematically, I was so great at networking, but I was horrible at fundraising. So that meant I met every startup investor in the country, more or less, or if I hadn't met them, I had knocked on their door and they turned me away. But I was really bad at fundraising, so none of those conversations went very well.
So what do you think was the problem at that point?
Well, fundraising is really hard. Most startup companies never raise venture capital because they just aren't able to do so. So there are a lot of really hard lessons to learn, and there's not like a general rule book that's out there. And unfortunately, there is lots of really good advice, but it is in a sea of like mostly bad advice. And if you're a first-time founder and have never raised before, you don't have many friends who have successfully raised, then, how do you differentiate great advice from bad advice? And so, and even worse, asking founders who have successfully raised once for advice on fundraising is like asking a lotto winner for advice on winning the lotto, because maybe they're actually really good at fundraising. Probably, if the stars aligned a little bit. And so, for most people, when you do something for the first time, you're rubbish. And that was very true for me. But we managed to scrape together enough money to like stay alive. And thankfully, from that perspective, thankfully, none of our team had any experience. And we were all either straight out of uni or really early on in our lives broadly. So we're pretty cheap. So VXT was able to like survive on the smell of an oily rag for like quite a few years.
Okay. So looking back at the good advice amongst the madness, any that sort of sticks out to you that you think others might actually benefit from?
Yeah. Well, there's like the practical, like the logistical advice around. So if we park like the 2 parts of fundraising, if I were to categorize it, like split it up, there are 2 parts of fundraising that are important, I guess, or maybe 3. So one is storytelling, one is like logistics, and the other is networking. So if we focus on logistics, like how do you organize a fundraising round for it to be as successful as you can? This is like the easiest advice to give. Well, you want to network with enough actual startup investors, and it is hard to differentiate ones who actually make investments and ones who like talking to startup founders. There are lots of them. Connect with enough of them, meet them regularly enough, be a line, not a dot, is a common saying. So you want to be building familiarity with investors before you raise money from them if you can. Keep them updated on the progress of your company and just like persistently get to know them. When you are ready to fundraise, when you need to fundraise, you should collect all of those connections and book, say 20 to 40 meetings, and ideally like 2 weeks or less, a very tight period, and try to, why you're doing that is you're trying to create kind of an auction dynamic where you're putting a lot of pressure on the investors in the process, and you're giving a sense that you are a really great founder, you know how to fundraise, you will be successful, and these investors should vie for the right to invest in your company as opposed to you're vying for the right to raise money from them. So collect all your meetings, put them together. It's just time box your fundraise. Hey, we're meeting with investors right now. We're going to raise this much money. We're going to close the round in 3 weeks, and you go from there. So that's the logistical piece. There's a lot. There's other details we could go into, but I'll leave that there. Obviously, networking is super important.
And just on that time boxing, because I speak to a lot of founders, and one of the common pain points is that area of raising capital, how long it takes, how long it takes them out of the focus on their business.
Yes.
And that can stretch out a long way. Is that a key reason that you I mean, there's probably a few aspects to why you can the benefits of that time boxing, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's many benefits. So, we kind of talked about, I guess, the benefits to the fundraising process itself, it having an impact on I guess how fast investors will move, how they'll think about your capabilities. Of course, it means you don't have to spend a whole lot of time on fundraising. You're building urgency, importantly. And yeah, I mean, in the early days, I was always fundraising because we were rarely successful, and it was a huge distraction. But importantly, I could never take my eyes off of the company because there were many, many things that I was solely responsible for, where if I didn't do those things, bad things would have happened at VXT. And so I could never focus exclusively on fundraising. And that probably contributed to some of those early failures as well. That's not true today, which is very nice. But yeah, the other part's storytelling. Storytelling is really, really hard to give good advice on because it really depends on your company. It takes a lot of practice to describe your business in a way that gives people a good idea of what you do, but also gets them excited. Because you can make someone really understand what you do, but they might think it's really boring and is not capable of creating an incredible company. So figuring that out is really important, not only for fundraising, but also for convincing great people to join you in all other areas of the business. Yeah, and networking is kind of more obvious. You just go meet people, especially founders who have raised capital, and prove to them that you're also a great founder, and they'll be more than happy to introduce you to investors. Because getting introductions is a really important part of being able to meet great investors.
Great. And can you walk us through the funding that you have raised and where you're at in that journey and valuations and so on? Yeah,
so we've raised $6 million since we started the company. Most of that has been in the last 12, 18 months.
Fantastic.
We've raised money many times. It was not a pre-seed, seed, Series A. It's more sometimes we raised, as little as $10,000. Sometimes we raised, $200,000. More recently, we've raised and that was, needed the money, for maybe put that into a picture for the first 3.5, maybe 4 years of the company. We never had more than a few months of runway in the bank at any given time. It was really common for us to have weeks worth of runway. Yeah, more recently we've raised more traditional venture capital and more traditional fundraising rounds for startup companies on the order of a few $1 million here and so on. We've raised money primarily from GD1 and Alpine Ventures. They're our two largest investors by cash. Yeah,
that's good. And maybe we can talk a little bit about growth because you've done really well on the growth front. When you look at that, what do you think are the keys to that growth?
Yeah, so at the start of last year, we had around $800,000 in annual recurring revenue, so start of 2024. Today, we're at about 4.8 million, just 18, 19 months later. We've grown throughout that time little more than, say, 10% per month on average. So that's really fast growth. We've been super excited about that. Often people are what's the thing that you've solved to grow fast, right? And of course, there's it's impossible to answer that question because it's not one thing. It's many hundreds of things together.
Of course, yeah.
But I guess to summarize, we built the phone system, launched that in March 2021. Over the following few years, we were just spending time with customers, fixing all the issues with it, because phone systems are like incredibly hard to build. Or rather, it's incredibly hard to build a reliable phone system. It's totally easy and dandy to build a demo and a first version. And so by the end of 2022, it was clear to us that, now we had all of this deep intuition for our customers, and there were many things that we got wrong in designing our application in the early days that would preclude fast growth, that would like hold us back or prevent certain use cases, prevent us from supporting certain use cases in the future. So we set out to rebuild our entire product from the ground up. So we had to change a bunch of things about the architecture of our database at the foundational layer.
That's a pretty hard thing to do while the plane's flying, as it were, isn't it? To make these sort of big architectural changes, but at the beginning, you don't necessarily know where you want to be in a few years ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's like often true. You generally you need to have the like humility to understand that you do not have perfect information, and so you should probably make trade-offs that support going fast and getting that information, and then accept that you'll have to once you have much better information, you'll have to like fix your mistakes. And there's a really common story behind like really great companies that they went through kind of similar rebuilds. Canva famously didn't release any updates for 2 years as they like migrated their entire code base from something like really old and crappy to like JavaScript, and that was really stressful for them because like there were copycats were coming out of the walls at that time. So yeah, we basically released very few updates to VXT through 2023, rebuilt the whole product in about 13, 14 months with 3 engineers, and then released this entirely new product as an update in January 2024, and migrated all of our existing customers to it over a weekend of downtime. And the new product was like transformatively better. And, when we then, a week later, when we were bringing on new customers, it was so viscerally, their reaction to the product was so viscerally different. They would, be like, wow, this is the best thing I've ever, seen in my life kind of thing.
Brilliant.
And it was really clear that we hadn't screwed things up, I guess. Importantly, no one at VXT had any professional experience prior to VXT, more or less. Our head of sales, Will, I went to high school with him. When I recruited him to join VXT, he was a qualified butcher selling wholesale to restaurants around Christchurch. He certainly didn't have any B2B SaaS experience. Why that's important is because, we were really, really bad at pretty much everything early on. But by early 2024, we had gotten to a point where we were actually really, really good at most of this stuff. And we'd gotten really good at marketing. We'd gotten really good at sales. And so our product became, probably the easiest to use phone system in the entire world when we released that update. We had gotten really good at sales and marketing, and so all of these things kind of came together, and then we started growing really, really fast. To put what is really good, as Luke just, of course he's the CEO, he would say that, right? So, our close rate globally from a 30-minute demo with a customer is north of 50%, which is, benchmarks differ, but the average close rate in B2B SaaS is around 20%, 25%. So it's pretty remarkable. If a law firm sees VXT, they're more likely than not to buy it. And most of the times when we lose a deal, that law firm is staying with what they have right now, and they'll come back a year later and buy VXT.
That's good. And how long do you find that sort of sales cycle takes? Does it happen, reasonably quickly? Because it's a reasonable deal to, switch out from one phone system to another, and you can understand why people are cautious to make those sort of changes, and why there is that percentage that are going to stay with what they've got.
Yeah, phone systems are incredibly sticky products, similar to CRMs and the other software like that. Our sales cycle is very, very short. It's less than a month. So much less than a month. And a lot of the customers that come to VXT, assuming they're like established companies, they've been using their prior system for like 5-10 years. So, and that translates to some super exciting unit economics for VXT as well, in the sense that we very rarely lose our customers.
That's great. And what are some of the things that you would do to sort of help move that along, quickly in terms of building confidence with potential customers and, making it very easy for this sale to happen quite quickly?
Well, there are two things. Obviously, one is just being really performant at B2B sales. It is a very well understood science, B2B sales. In New Zealand, generally, sales and marketing, incredibly immature when compared to the US. A byproduct of that is that, many law firms in the US, probably maybe not most, but very many have dedicated sales and marketing teams. In New Zealand, I don't know of a single law firm that has a sales and marketing team. And so, of course, that also is more broadly true in SaaS and technology in New Zealand. We're really bad at sales and marketing. Hopefully no one takes offense to that. But so being really great at sales is super important. The only other thing is really, obviously social proof is super important in any sales process. So if you have really happy customers, that will contribute to trust in the market that you're trying to sell into. And it's true for us and has only become more true over time, I guess, as we've improved that product and improved our customer experience more broadly across the board.
Mm. Now, when I look at successful companies, so often the outward success is a reflection of what goes on internally in terms of culture and so on. So, how have you shaped the culture with VXT? How have you made that different to, the run-of-the-mill startup?
For a long time, most of the people who worked at VXT had been there since the early days. And certainly we built and improved that culture together, coming back to this point of naivety. None of us had much professional experience. And so when we were deciding what and how to do things, we would think about it as, from from first principles, I don't know, it's a bit overused. But yeah, we would think about it what do we want to do here and why? Why is it beneficial for us personally and the company more broadly? And just do it like that, as opposed to, I did it this way at my old company and it's good, So because we didn't have that resource to lean on or that experience to lean on. So yeah, and I think, what would I want a workplace to look like for me personally? Well, sometimes I might stay up late, and maybe it's because I was working a lot the prior evening or whatever, maybe personal commitments. And so, I don't want to just have to wake up at 7 a.m. so I can get to work on time arbitrarily because work starts at 9. So we, at VXT, we pick our own hours, and you can kind of design the way you work around your life a little bit more. Of course, there's lots of different aspects to our culture, but I guess maybe it might give you a sense of the process we went through. But certainly, we've always been close as a team. I think that was super important. We're all quite good friends with each other, and that's still true today, even as the team has grown. And we don't want to lose that as well. So how do you I guess maintain that culture of closeness? And it's just whenever there's how do we make this really cool and great place to work? We go through that thought process, and ultimately, of course, there's also all of the financial and business considerations in there as well. And most of the time, the thing that sounds like the coolest is actually also probably it's probably the financially, the fiduciarily most responsible decision to make. But it's not always obvious.
Interesting. So what would be an example of that?
Well, attrition is incredibly expensive.
Yes.
And the worse your documentation is, the worse your systems and processes are in the business, the more expensive that is. Right. So of course VXT has really great documentation and systems and processes in place, especially today. We're incredibly mature in that area, but even still, attrition would be really expensive. Losing a staff member, you have to spend a significant amount of time to identify new people to join your company. Those things are also only more true, it's only more expensive if your team incredible people, if they're exceptional people. It's only more expensive because, of course, those individuals are perhaps rarer. So, you can, of course, then work to, it must be harder to find them, harder to convince them to join. All translates to cost and time and so on. And so So attrition is really expensive. And most of that cost is indirect. It is hard to measure. And things that are hard to measure, people often discount. Like in economics, like it's externalities. Things that are hard to measure are often like discounted, like seen as like being less significant. So if we lost someone on our team, pretty much everyone on our team, the cost of that to the company is probably an opportunity cost, all these other things, easily six figures, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so, okay, well, what am I willing to spend to avoid that attrition? Okay, well, I'm probably willing to spend a significant amount of money. And so, well, what do people care about? What do they want from work? What can I spend my money on to make sure that they love working at VXT and will not leave? Well, of course, well, we're going to pay them competitive salaries. Everyone has equity at VXT. That's super important. That translates to like lots of other benefits kind of separate to this conversation. But, when thinking about like, benefits to provide to the team, okay, well, we're like running away from this massive mountain of costs that, in my view, most people like look at it and see it as like a little hill on the ground. Yeah.
And the way you remunerate your staff, I saw something at one point around, correct me if I'm wrong, but an automated sort of, pay rise type scenario. So I might just caveat this really quickly with, we've only ever lost one full-time staff member. So, and I've never fired anyone at VXT. So I just want to put that out there because it's cool to hear, okay, well, VXT sounds great, but like, what does that actually mean in numbers? Yeah. And we've been around for 7 years. So one full-time staff member, 7 years, that's pretty rare. We're a team of 25 today. Yeah, we have automatic pay rises, 5% automatic pay rises on base salary every 6 months in April and October. And that's massive. And of course that would, compounding, right? So it goes to a really large number over like 10, 20 years. Like why? Well, performance, assessing one's performance is really expensive and probably, going back to that thing we mentioned earlier, hey, you probably don't have perfect information. So you're probably going to make a mistake when you're assessing people's like what you should pay them. So if you're probably going to make a mistake and it's really expensive to do it, well, okay, well, let's like just not do that. And, of course, inflation is a thing. And then separately, like why not do one automatic raise once a year as an alternative? Or interesting, like, another caveat here, but like an interesting study, on humans and particularly how we respond to rewards, found that, let's say I give you a gift, Paul. Let's say I give you a gift for Christmas, and it's like this $100 item, and you're like, you really want it, right? You're stoked with that $100 gift, right? Well, what if I gave you that same gift, but in two parts, the start, middle of the year and the end of the year? Well, the study found that people get a much greater sense of reward when it is regular. And in that specific situation that the example I gave, the more frequent reward of the same size was actually much more rewarding than less frequent reward of the same size. So yeah, that's kind of the rationale behind it. Yeah, altogether. Yeah, it's really interesting, and we could probably go into this topic in a whole lot of detail for a long time. But no, that's really fascinating. I think we're probably just about out of time. Anything else that you want to share about your story and the VXT story and anything that shaped it?
What I'd just say to anyone who's listening to this podcast is like VXT is always looking for great people. We're not necessarily spending a lot of time on recruitment today, but if you're really passionate about joining a company like VXT, then you should reach out, and even if we're not looking for a role that's suitable for you now, you should be persistent with it, and you might end up joining our team in the future.
Fantastic. And any closing advice for listeners, Luke?
I get like a lot of people who are interested in founding companies come up to me and ask me like, how do I do this thing? Or I gave a talk at university last week, and founders came up to me afterwards and they were like, mentioned you should go and talk to customers, and they were like, how do I do that specifically? Like, what steps do I take? And like, ultimately, people are just like overthink things like too much, and you should just go and do the thing. Like, just go and do it. It's like, and if you're being held back by like what ifs and, well, what if this bad thing happens when I go and do it? Then ultimately, maybe it's not for you.
Yeah. Great. Oh, well, thank you so much, Luke Campbell. Really appreciate having you on the New Zealand Tech podcast. Some really great insights and fantastic to hear your story. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And, of course, a big thank you to our to show partners, to Workday, Gorilla Technology, HP, Spark, 2 Degrees, and 1NZ for their support of the show and of the broader tech and startup and innovation ecosystems here in New Zealand. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you on the next episode. See ya.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.